Was a bit shocked when FIFINE reached out to me asking if I wanted to do a video on their K688. Not only am I mostly a mouse guy, but I also have an expensive taste in audio, with my main setup being a Neumann CLM103 running into a Universal Apollo Twin X, a setup that costed me well over $2,000. You know, I'm a bit of an audio snob, so I've turned my nose up at this thing on more than one occasion, but this microphone is actually pretty interesting and surprisingly good, especially for how much it costs. So, quick disclaimer, FIFINE did send me this microphone free of charge. To my knowledge, I do not have to send it back, I get to keep it. And they did send it out for review, but I do have full editorial control over the video. FIFINE isn't paying me to say anything, and they don't get to see the video before I upload it. The only guidelines they gave me is that I have to put the Amazon page in the description and have the microphone name in the title. So, other than that, I'm good to go. So everything I'm saying here is 100% genuine and my own thoughts alone. Now that I'm starting to get companies reaching out to me to do reviews for their products, I just want to go ahead and say this as the first one. I am not going to be doing reviews for things unless I get to say whatever the fuck I want. If I can't speak my mind, if I can't be honest, then there's no point in doing the video. So the K688 is a $70-ish XLR USB dynamic microphone that comes with a pop filter and shock mount. You get a USB cable in the box, but no XLR cable. And I think the dual input idea is fantastic. It's great for people who want a decent microphone, but also want to upgrade to an audio interface later on down the line, but don't have the money right now in order to do so. Another good thing to note is that it has a USB-C connection as the USB interface instead of something like USB Micro B. The build quality on this thing is pretty not great. Honestly, it's probably the worst part about this microphone. It just kind of feels cheap. I think it's metal, but it's such a cheap metal that I can't tell if it's hard plastic or metal. This does have a benefit of being able to fit on cheaper boom arms. However, it does also come at the quite distinct con of maybe not holding up over time. Granted, this is a streaming product, so it's going to be sitting on a boom arm, not doing anything. But if you plan on taking it off the boom arm and putting it in storage a lot, I'm not so confident about how it's going to hold up with that kind of use and abuse. The knobs and stuff on the back do feel pretty solid. They don't wiggle too much, and all the ports feel pretty good. One thing I did want to mention, though, is that you have a capacitive mute button here, which is super cool. It only works with USB, so that's sad, but with that said, I really like the capacitive mute switch instead of a physical button like on other USB mics. With the capacitive mute switch, you can be gentle with it, and you don't have to hear the button actually toggle to mute the mic. And to demonstrate this mute button, I'm going to go ahead and talk. I'm going to gently press again, and now you can hear me talk. So I don't know if any of that popped up. I'm not monitoring the microphone. That aside, I do want to talk about the included pop filter and the shock mount. First of all, I think it's super cool that you get both for how cheap the microphone is. The pop filter itself is actually pretty good. It's a windscreen, so it's not really a pop filter. It's not going to be as good as something like a Stedman PS101 or any other gooseneck pop filter that is actually pretty good. Windscreens sit directly on the microphone, so it doesn't get much distance between your breaths and the diaphragm, so that's why windscreens aren't really an ideal choice, but it looks great, and for a windscreen, it performs really well. It's also pretty secure onto the microphone here, and it feels really, really high quality. Taking the pop filter off itself, you have this metal grate sort of design here, which is actually very reminiscent to the SM7B sort of metal grate design. As you can see, this is a bit of a cheaper, more glossy metal, and the holes in the grate are actually bigger, so that's why I'm kind of having to be careful here, but ultimately it's the same premise. Unfortunately, the shock mount, though, is not very good. As you can see, I'm kind of dabbing just the boom arm here, and you can hear how rough that is. It rejects most of the table noise, like I'm tapping the table here. Sounds pretty good. But if I actually start to tap the microphone itself is pretty resonant, so that doesn't help much either. I think it's because these are like very rigid elastic bands and don't allow the mic to move around much, so it's not absorbing much shock. If these were slightly less rigid elastic, I think it would be better, but you know, I'm not the engineer here. I think it's a cool, very sleek design. It just could use a little work to make it improve actually rejecting some of the shocks of tapping the boom arm. Like I said, tapping the desk, it's not so bad, so it's not as bad as if you had something in a firm mount, but it's one of the worst shock mounts I've ever seen. But at least it does eliminate some rejection. Well, let's talk about the most important thing, sound quality. Firstly, I want to see if the microphone sounds any different going between XLR and USB. Here's how the microphone sounds over USB. I have this plugged in through a USB-C cable directly into the back of my computer, and I'm happy to announce that there's no software needed for this microphone. I figured there might have been some sort of driver to install, but I literally just plugged it in and it worked. No problem. I just adjusted the knob on the back and like a 10-second setup there, so that was really great. And here's how the microphone sounds directly into my audio interface. So we're over XLR. For the sake of fairness, all of the XLR testing in this video is going directly into my Apollo Twin X. I'm thinking about getting a cheaper audio interface to make these things a little bit more fair to the budget-friendly audience because it's an expensive interface. So maybe I'll get a Scarlett Solo 4th Gen. One more time, here's how the microphone sounds over USB, plugged directly into the back of my computer. And lastly, here's how the microphone sounds directly plugged into the XLR interface one more time. So after listening back to that, I don't personally think I heard much of a difference. I think it sounded pretty good, pretty much identical between USB and XLR. So that's really, really awesome. So now we'll be talking into XLR over the Apollo Twin X for the rest of the video, mostly because I just want to see how this microphone competes with some other microphones that I feel are its competition. So firstly, this isn't exactly fair, but this is the microphone that I normally use. This is a Neumann TLM-103 plugged directly into the Universal Audio Apollo Twin X. Then I'm running a Universal Audio 610B tube amp simulator and a Universal Audio 1176 compressor. That then runs into the back of my computer, so this is definitely not a fair comparison at all. But I've spent so much money on my main audio setup that I feel like I have to include it in at least every single video for at least 10 seconds so I get that money worth. So this is what my typical audio setup sounds like. So I'm on the K688 again, and this is a vastly cheaper setup than what was shown previous. You tell me if you hear a 46-time difference in sound quality. I personally would say there is a difference. It's quite obvious that the Neumann sounds better. So here we are on the Shure SM7B. This is the go-to streaming mic these days, and sound-wise, they are shockingly similar. I will say though, monitoring these two live, I will give the edge to the SM7B. I think it is an overall more full and more refined tone. This microphone cost $400 brand new, so quite a big price difference. I did a whole video on the SM7B and why I think it is one of the most overrated microphones on the market right now. So if you want to check that out, it's going to be in the description as well. Back on the K688, and you can see that this microphone is tuned very similarly. You get that more dark, rich sound between these two mics. The next microphone is the Electro Voice RE20. This is my favorite dynamic microphone on the planet, and I do feel like it is a significant upgrade in sound quality over the K688, at least on my voice. The RE20 has that low end, but it also has a lot more high end, and I feel like no other dynamic microphone sounds nearly as good as this. This microphone does cost more expensive than the SM7B. It is a $450 microphone, and it comes with no shock mount or any pop filter, so very, very skimpy on the features with this, and this is one of those microphones that also has really bad shock rejection. You know, if I start tapping the boom arm, then it's insanely loud. But $450, Electro Voice RE20, there's that. Back to the K688, and it does sound smoother, I'll give it that. That's one of the things I don't like about the RE20 is that it's very aggressive and has a very, very big radio sound. But I don't think the K688 can take on the pure sound quality of the RE20. Definitely one of the best tuned dynamic mics on the market. Now, this is an unfair comparison, but I wanted to compare against a wide range of microphones that you can get an idea on how this competes, because I'd argue that it is competing. You know, it is holding its own. It might not be winning, but it is doing well enough. Moving on to the last mic to compare, this is the Shure MV7. This is Shure's dual input XLR USB dynamic microphone. And big disclaimer, this is not the Shure MV7 Plus. This is the Gen 1, which you can still buy for $250. The MV7 is just very mid-forward and nasally, especially on my already very mid-forward voice. It just doesn't sound right. But I'd also like to point out that the K688 is cheaper than both the SM7B and the Shure MV7. And I compare the K688 to the MV7 so much because this is my backup microphone. I'm pretty comfortable in saying, based off of all this audio demonstration, that the K688 is in fact better than the Shure MV7 Gen 1 because the pop filter on this microphone is trash. There's no shock mount and it does a horrible job and shock rejection. One of the worst microphones I own for it. If I start tapping the boom arm, it gets really bad. You need a software to use it over USB, and the tuning is really far off what you expect from the SM7B. So to be honest, anyone who says this is an SM7B alternative is either wearing some of the worst headphones I've ever heard, or they're drunk and just lying. The Shure MV7 Plus might be better though, so I can't speak to that, but that mic is also $270, so I'll let you decide. Moving back to the K688, and I think this mic is what the MV7 was trying to be all along. It's trying to be a cheap SM7B alternative. So let's summarize how I feel about the K688 from FIFINE. I think it is a really great beginner microphone. It's probably one of the best options below $100, and in my personal opinion, it's better than some options even above that, into the $200 and maybe even $300 price range. And since it's a dynamic, you get that really great ambient noise rejection, which is great for streams. You get the USB-C connectivity with the expandability of the XLR port as well. And you get all that for the low price of like $70. But you can also find it on sale for like $50 every now and then. There are a few cons, like the build quality and the poor shock rejection, but ultimately for $70, you can't really ask for miracles. Like I said earlier, the build quality might not be a concern since it's meant to be a streaming mic. It kind of just sits on the boom arm, not really getting beaten or battered. But for the price of $70, I think you get a much more well-rounded experience than even something that costs $200 more, like the Shure MV7. There are other microphones that I don't have that have XLR and USB. So those are things like the Samson Q2U, the Rode Pod mic, and granted, Shure has recently released the MV7 Plus, which is an update to the original MV7, so that might be something to look into, but that is a $270 microphone. I personally don't think there's anything quite like the value you get with this. It's one of the best sounding budget mics out there, and it is also something that you get a lot for what you pay for. You get the pop filter, the shock mount, and the dual input connectivity. Overall, I think it's a great product, and it gives something that content creators don't really think a lot about when beginning: options. But if you're just looking for something to get that'll hold you down while you're saving up for that big upgrade, I think this is a great choice. If you're just a beginner, you're not too serious about content creation yet, I think this is a great choice. If you're just looking for a really good sounding cheap microphone, I think this is a great choice. Overall, I think this microphone just performs insanely well for the price, and for me personally, it is definitely replacing my MV7 as my backup mic.